Hi, and welcome back to Psych with Mr. Snyder. And today we're finishing up our chapter on memory and finishing up our unit on cognitive learning. And today we'll be talking about forgetting and how to improve memory. Take a look at our learning targets. We'll analyze how forgetting occurs. We will identify and describe the three basic memory tasks and how difficult and easy they are. We will contrast how the three different ways of forgetting are different, and those are the three natural ways of forgetting. There's some forgetting that occurs due to disease or injury, and then we'll also describe some techniques for improving memory. So let's go ahead and get started. Forgetting can occur at any one of the three memory stages, either sensory, short-term or long-term. In sensory memory, the information we encode decays almost immediately unless we start thinking about it and it's transferred into short-term memory. In short-term memory, if you don't rehearse it or practice it, it will disappear after only 10 to 12 seconds unless it is transferred into long-term memory. And information stored in short-term memory can be lost when it is displaced by new information in a process known as interference. But the most familiar and significant cases of forgetting involve the inability to use information in long-term memory due to filing errors or not being able to remember things, just not being able to access it because we didn't tie it to something else that we knew, or just plain forgetting. This is called EBBINGHAUS'S curve of forgetting, and it basically measures how fast we forget. He gave some nonsense syllables to his participants in his studies, and then he measured how quickly they forgot it. After the first hour, it drops sharply after the first hour of learning. Or, I'm sorry, during the first hour of learning, it drops sharply. You can see down here, 20 minutes, immediate recall, you get close to 100%. 20 minutes, we are down to less than 60% recall. The 1 hour mark, we're below 50%. 9 hours, we're below 40%. But then it kind of evens off, and it becomes more gradual. And even 30 days later, most participants can remember at least 20% of the nonsense syllables. And they use nonsense syllables. Why? Because they can't tie it to anything else they've already learned. It's just simply nonsense. The basic memory tasks are recognition, recall, and relearning. Recognition involves just simply identifying whether or not you've seen an object before, and it is the easiest of the memory tasks. So usually a lot of multiple choice questions are this way. If I give you three things that you haven't seen before and one that you have, you'll immediately know that the answer is the one that you have seen before. Recall is a little bit tougher, and it involves bringing something back to mind. So you see something and you say, I don't immediately recognize whether that is something I've come across before. You have to actually sit and think and search for it and possibly reconstruct it in your mind. And lastly, the third memory task is relearning. And it's learning something a second time, and since you've already learned it before, it usually takes less time than the original time in which it was learned. Different kinds of forgetting. The natural ways, or the normal forgetting, is interference, which we've already covered. That is when new information takes the place of what has already been placed in your memory. And decay. Decay is natural, and it's the fading away of a memory over time. You may not have as strong of a memory or as vivid of a memory as you once did before because of decay. Both of these are the normal parts of forgetting, but there are more extreme kinds of forgetting, such as repression. And this is one of Freud's terms from the psychoanalytic view. Freud says that our brains sometimes forget things on purpose in order to prevent painful feelings and unpleasantness. So a lot of Sexual abuse, physical abuse, even verbal abuse can be repressed because the memories of it are so painful, we don't want to remember it, and our brain adapts and forgets it. It may not forget it, it may just put it in your unconscious mind where you're not able to access it. And then we have amnesia. Repression would be one of the three ways of forgetting that are natural. Amnesia is caused by trauma to the brain. This would be a injury. So people with retrograde amnesia forget things before the event. So everything leading up to the event. You know, this is what we call. My psych professor in college called it soap opera amnesia. So, who am I married to? Who's my wife? Who's my husband? I don't know. I don't remember anything. And then memory loss of events after the trauma is called anterograde amnesia. So, retro before, antero after. Easy. So, this type of amnesia is something that we all suffer from. It's called infantile amnesia, and it's the forgetting of events before the age of 3. Now, people will debate me and say, I remember things before the age of 3, but really what happens is you probably saw a picture of something before the age of 3, and then were able to reconstruct the memory in your mind of that you actually experiencing that, even though it's not true and it didn't happen and you can't recall it. This is based on biological and cognitive factors. So when you're born, your brain has a lot more neurons than it needs, and then as sort of an evolving way of doing something, the brain, in order to save energy, severs and doesn't use a lot of those neurological connections anymore, so that you can save energy, and that is why those connections are severed and you're not able to remember things that you were when you were a child. And finally, we have the techniques for improving memory. There's drill and practice, but it's an effective way to remember information, repetition, but you have to improve on it if you want it to be transferred into your long-term memory for a while and you don't forget it, and that is relating it to existing knowledge, which is elaborative rehearsal. We've got forming unusual associations, and one of this is the method of loci. And the method of loci is actually forming an unusual association with a physical location which you're familiar with. So take your house. If you need to remember a list of items, visualize yourself walking through your house, and you can actually put things in certain places, in weird places. So if you need milk, put milk in your bed. If you need cheese, put cheese on the door handle, you know, and just walk through your house and remember these unusual associations. And then lastly, mnemonic devices and catchy and easily recognizable formats to help remember more complex information. It's basically chunking information, and we've already talked about chunking. And so let's review our learning targets. Well, we analyzed how forgetting occurs at each memory stage, and we talked about the speed of forgetting in Ebbinghaus's forgetting curve. We did the 3 basic memory tasks. We contrasted how the 3 ways of forgetting are different, and we actually looked at some other more serious ways of forgetting. And then we talked about some ways to improve our memory. So that ends our cognitive unit on learning, and we'll start preparing for the unit exam and your Chapter 7 quiz. And I hope to see you in class, and we'll be ready for it. Have a great night. Bye-bye.